So we're going to work on Valor Gear Company. They had a static budget based on 5,000 units. A static budget is a budget that's presumed at one level of activity. So they thought they were going to sell 5,000 units, and therefore they thought they were going to have revenue of 95,000 and these various costs. Now they want to analyze at the end of the period how things went. So at the end of the period, records show that they didn't sell 5,000 units. They sold 4,800, and they had sales revenue and these various costs. So how did it go? Well, what we're going to do is create a flexible budget at the actual activity achieved. So we would not expect to get revenue of 95,000 because we didn't sell 5,000 units as we expected. So what would the revenue expectation be? And then once we've adjusted expectations for what we actually sold, then we'll compare that to what they actually spent to see how things went. This separates the profit shift that's due to just a change in volume. How much of the profit was just that you sold 200 less, and how much of the profit was you didn't spend what you should have spent. All right, so what sales revenue do we expect at this level instead of 5,000? Well, let's see. What is the sales price per unit? It's $19. We took the sales expected at 5,000 divided by 5,000, so it was $19 per unit. So let's multiply that times the new number of units. So we would expect 91.2 in revenue if we sold 4,800. All right, let's do the same thing for product cost. Divide it out by the 500 and then multiply it by the new level. Same thing for your variable cost. Get it per unit and then multiply it times the new units. And then we'll just borrow the formula over here and let it do the math for us. Now for fixed costs, we're not going to divide it out. Why? Fixed costs don't change with activity, so even though we sold fewer, we wouldn't expect that cost to go down. And we'll borrow the math over here. So we would expect profit to be less by 1,300 due to volume variance, due only to a shift in units. Now we can compare the actual results with what we would have expected at the 4,800 unit level and then see how things looked. So they had actual of 92,000. Drop to zero there. The variable product costs were 51.8. Variable selling 7,100. Fixed product 6,900 and fixed selling 12,000. All right, so pull this math over. So our flexible budget variance is 2,000. So we expected less profit because of the volume in units, but the actual profit was better than our new updated expectation. Well, that's great. Let's investigate what led to that. So actual revenue is a little higher than what we expected. That's favorable. And this expenses were lower. Notice I'm doing all these variances as absolute values because revenue being higher and expense being higher give you a different result. So if revenue's higher, that's favorable. If expenses are higher, that's unfavorable. So I'm just doing them all here as absolute values. And then I'm doing either favorable or un. So revenue is higher than expected, that's favorable. Expenses were lower than expected, that's also favorable. Here expenses were lower than expected, favorable. So all three of those were favorable. What about the fixed cost? That's 100 absolute value, and it's also favorable. And then there was no variance here. So the total variance was favorable, made up of a number of things here above. So the total variance is both of these, the total profit variance for the period, but it's made up of two components. Now, why would we separate that out? We separate that out because the sales manager would be mostly responsible for the volume variance. The sales manager might also want to take credit for having had slightly higher pricing for each of the units sold. But the product manager see if I can get that written out. The product manager would like to take credit for keeping these costs down, the product cost. So we keep the variance separate because different managers are responsible for controlling different pieces. So the sales manager would be responsible for having come in 200 units lower than the initial expectation. But the product manager would get most of the glory because the savings here were enough to offset the lower units. So you can tell overall here that the profit of 14.2 was actually higher than the initial budget, but that was a combination of fewer units but great cost control.